This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black about minimizing the impact of uncertain times on your financial health. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. Hi, everybody. It's Todd Bishop. Happy New Year. I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite gadgets from my youth. This is Dr. Rhythm. It's technically known as the Boss DR110. It was introduced by Roland Corporation back in 1983. It cost about $250 at the time, which is about $750 to $800 today if you take into account inflation. As you can hear, it's a drum synthesizer. It's a handheld device about the size and shape of about a medium-sized video cassette from back in the day. It's in a gray case with knobs on the upper right for adjusting the tempo and the balance, the accent, and the volume. There are 2 rows of blue buttons, physical buttons, on the bottom, and you can choose and play pre-programmed beats. It also allows you to create your own rhythms with a row of instrument buttons. There's a bass drum and a snare, a hi-hat, cymbal, and of course, this being the 1980s, a clapping sound. There's a small screen in the upper left, about 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and it has a grid where you can place dots to program beats. You can also use it in tap right mode, where you add instruments live to the loop. So that's the Dr. Rhythm, and my brother had one of these devices back in the day. In fact, he had this exact device. It was a hand-me-down from one of his friends. And I have distinct memories of using Dr. Rhythm, playing around with it for, it seemed like it must have been hours at his college apartment, coming up with different beats and trying out different things, seeing what would happen when I placed dots in different places on the grid. And I remember how magical it felt using this piece of technology to augment my own limited musical abilities, creating something that I couldn't create on my own, while still being in control of the creative process myself. And of course, these days it's very rudimentary. PC and smartphone apps can do all of this and much more. This would not impress any of the younger people in the audience at all, but it's a great piece of retro tech. And looking back, I'm realizing it was probably one of the devices that influenced my own interest in the potential of technology to help accomplish things that we otherwise couldn't do as mere humans. And so recently, one of my own college and high school friends reminded me of this device. I mentioned it to my brother, and he still had it. So he brought it to our holiday gathering in California, and he let me bring it home with me to Seattle. And I've been having fun over the past few days since we got back, just playing around with Dr. Rhythm at home. I'm an amateur weekend guitar player, and it's been really cool to sort of plunk and strum along with these beats that I knew 40 years ago. And so, of course, at some point, I started to think, what could AI do with this thing? So it turned into a fun little project with a bit of a surprising outcome for me, at least. And ultimately, it reinforced some of what I've learned over the past year or so about AI and the creative process. So I wanted to share all of this with you on this week's show. After the break, I'll explain what I did to blend Dr. Rhythm with AI, and I'll let you hear the result for yourself. Then later on, I'll share some of my larger thoughts about what it says about technology and, humanity. Not to overstate it. That's all coming up on this week's GeekWire podcast. This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's money hack about minimizing the impact of uncertain times on your financial health. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
How do uncertain times affect your financial health? I'm Brian Westbrook, host of Money Hacks presented by BECU, joined by Stacy Black, lead financial educator for BECU. The world around us is changing, Stacy. What do we do?
Yeah, we need to stay focused on what we can control. It's really volatile right now, and there's not a lot we can control. So focus in on what you have control over and look for resources. BECU has great resources for our members, so check with your financial institution and see how they can help. And remember to stay focused on your financial goals. That's why we're going through this work.
We'll have more on this topic, including the latest on student loan forgiveness and what we should do when this topic keeps changing in the world around us. Thank you, Stacy. For more on this topic, visit Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. All right, before I explain what I did with Dr. Rhythm and AI, let me give you just a little bit of context. As I was reflecting on the past year over the holiday break, and especially everything that we've seen and heard and experienced in the realm of artificial intelligence, I kept coming back to something that Microsoft's Chief Technology Officer, Kevin Scott, said back in May.
You really want to focus on things that have made the transition from impossible to merely difficult.
Of course, he was talking to the engineers and the technologists in the audience about the tools and the solutions that they dream up and build. But the message also resonated with me as an everyday technology user, just someone who's into figuring out, what these tools that all these smart, creative people create can do to change and hopefully improve my own work in life. And over the past year, this has ranged from simple stuff like using AI to figure out the year of a vintage concert poster or creating fun name tags for my extended family, to bigger things at work like dramatically improving the process of organizing and retrieving information with tools like Otter AI and Google's Notebook LM. At home, AI is literally helping me sleep better at night. That's thanks to a ground light AI system on my back porch that was customized to keep raccoons out of our house by accurately identifying them and then turning on flashing lights and a radio to scare them away. I'll link to the video and the story about that for anybody who missed it. I've also dabbled in other forms of AI, as listeners to the GeekWire podcast know, and that includes music. One of our most popular and fun GeekWire podcast episodes of the past year was our attempt to use AI to create a jingle for our My AI segment on the show.
My AI. The future's here, it's in the sky.
So all of this was in the back of my mind when I was reunited recently with Dr. Rhythm. After recording myself playing guitar with one of those preset beats, it was Rhythm 5 on Bank D for any fellow Dr. Rhythm aficionados out there. I went back and I found just a simple 35-second clip with some basic strumming along to that beat. I then uploaded that clip to Udio. Listeners who caught our past episode will remember this as one of the AI music services that's being sued by the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, on claims of copyright infringement. So I will admit it felt a little ironic when I was uploading the clip of my collaboration with Dr. Rhythm to have to check a box attesting that I had the right to use and distribute the file. At any rate, from there, I was able to use AI to extend and accompany the song. This is using a feature that Udio introduced in June. You can hear the AI kick in right here. Personally, I'm amazed by this technology. It's not exactly a Grammy-winning performance, but it's certainly better than anything I could do on my own, especially in the couple of minutes that it took the AI to produce it. I think my teenage self goofing around with Dr. Rhythm at my brother's college apartment would have just been totally blown away. And, it started to make me think it's passable and maybe even pretty good as a piece of low-key background music. In fact, I've got the perfect application for that coming up after the break. It's Todd Bishop, and I wanted to tell you about a favorite podcast of mine. It's called Booming, and it's a show that has opened my eyes to a whole range of things, like what's really happening when I scan a digital coupon at the grocery store, and how robots are changing the construction of buildings in downtown Seattle, among many other topics. Booming is a podcast from KUOW Public Radio in Seattle. It's about the economic forces shaping our lives in the Pacific Northwest. It's co-hosted by reporters Joshua McNichols and Monica Nicholsberg. That's a familiar name and voice to longtime GeekWire readers and listeners. They answer questions that listeners are wondering about, like why are sports tickets so expensive? Or how hard should you actually work at work? Plus, every episode ends with a game. That's Booming from KUOW Public Radio. Find episodes on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, bringing this all together, here is an extended clip of Microsoft CTO Kevin Scott speaking at the company's Build Developer Conference in Seattle in May about the opportunity presented by AI, accompanied by what should now be a very familiar tune.
You really want to focus on things that have made the transition from impossible to merely difficult. Like, that's where all the interesting stuff is. Like, if you look at the history of platform revolutions, like, that's where all the interesting companies emerge from. It's where all the innovation happens. It's where all of the value gets unlocked. And in the case of technology platforms that are sort of exponentially progressing, it's like the only reasonable place to go aim. Because if you're aiming somewhere different, like, the platform is becoming so much more capable and so much cheaper over time that everything that you sort of have in your imagination that's too expensive to do right now or too fragile is going to become cheap and robust before you can even blink your eye.
All right, that was a lot of fun to put together. And for me, using the AI music generator in this situation, since it's riffing on music that I made, it doesn't kind of create that same guilt that would come from simply entering a prompt and having the AI mimic a popular genre based on the text that I put in. And I think this speaks in a bigger picture way to one of my own takeaways from using AI at work over the past year. AI, for me at least, so far, is best when it's part of the creative process, not simply generating the end product. At a basic level, for me, it's about things like using an AI tool to summarize or retrieve a piece of information as I'm writing an article, or improve a headline or a sentence that I've already written. And it's not about just letting AI do all of the work. It's about AI as an assistant and a collaborator and a co-creator, ultimately helping me do my best and helping me do things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that's what I've learned over the past year. And I think it's one of the reasons why generally I tend to be a little more optimistic about the potential of all those previously impossible things that developers and engineers are working on now. I mean, just wait until Dr. Rhythm meets a quantum computer. Thanks for listening. If you're a fan of the show, please take a moment to give us a rating and a review on Apple Music or Spotify. And thank you for all of your support. We've got some great interviews and discussions in store in 2025, and we will be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.